Welcome back. Joining the show as he does each and every week is Sky News Australia media watchdog columnist Gerard Henderson. Gerard, there's now a lack of evening current affairs shows on the ABC following the demise of Lateline, the Drama Now Q&A. This and Network 10's decision to dump the project was discussed on Insiders last Sunday, but they forgot to mention a key point.
I just wanted to also point out it's been a tough week for many in the industry with the news that the project, your show, Waleed, and Q&A coming to an end. Having occasionally appeared on the project and occasionally hosted Q&A, disappointing to hear this news. And Greg, you wrote a wonderful lament for Q&A during the week as well. I think discussion programs about news and current affairs are always important, so thoughts with all of those involved.
Yeah.
Gerard, what was missing from the analysis?
Well, what's missing is any explanation. I mean, why did these programs fail? Why is it that after 8 o'clock at night, the ABC cannot run a current affairs program, unlike the BBC in Britain it can? And the reason is because essentially they were left-wing dominated programs which were devoid of viewpoint diversity. Now, Greg Sheridan said he'd been on it many times, I think over 20 times, but he was the kind of the token conservative you'd drag on the program. And he enjoyed that. But for the most part, if you had a panel of 5, 4 of them are on the left, usually plus the presenter, and plus a rather left-wing audience. So after a while, it became very boring. So what's missing at the ABC is viewpoint diversity, and no one recognises that. So even when that program's wound up, and the project as well, which was also dominated by the left, when these programs are wound up, it's like that they suddenly died or something, but they didn't suddenly die. They had a sudden death because they became boring, because there was no program diversity and they were dominated by left-wing thought, and they had left-wing viewers, but they lost all their conservative viewers and others who wanted something interesting.
Well, I think they died a slow death and then a very sudden death. But
yes.
The diversity of views is that there is not an issue just for those particular shows. And we've discussed this on the program before. When Nick Bryant commenced as a presenter of ABC Radio and National Saturday Extra, he promised a diversity of voices. Let's have a look how that's going.
He has not invoked the Insurrection Act, so I'm not clear what legal authority he has to send Marines to into Los Angeles. He is always threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act. If he does threaten invoke the Insurrection Act, then we have a kind of Hitler Nazi enabling act kind of moment where after the Reichstag fire, that's what we authoritarianism scholars have always been looking for, that, declared emergency that will allow sort of military power, the president to take military powers.
Your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, that's absolute tosh. Here you've got, and Nick Bryant didn't query it, here you've got a Yale professor who should know better, comparing the possibility that President Trump may enact an insurrection act with the enabling acts which were implemented by the Nazis in Germany after the Reichstag fire, which they started, and then blamed the left for it. And the enabling act was the one act coming in 1933 after the fire that made possible all the other Nazi atrocities, Nazi German atrocities in Germany and elsewhere, made them legal under the legal system. So what this professor from Yale is saying, without correction from Nick Bryant, who also should know better, is that Trump is just like Hitler was. Trump in 2025 is just about like Hitler was in 1933, and that is an appalling thing to say. It doesn't do any justice whatsoever to the victims of Nazi Germany, but it's also a distortion. And young people in particular listening into that may think there's a comparison because he is a learned Yale professor and he's not corrected by a learned British Australian journalist like Nick Bryant. And he should have been corrected because it's just completely wrong, and it gives a false impression not only of current United States but also of historical Germany through the 30s into the early 40s.
But Gerard, I mean, you get 2 lawyers in a room, you'll have 3 different opinions, right? So it's very well that professor may have had his view, but there's absolutely no reason, if you're going to have diversity of views, to at least have someone on there who might have a more measured view of these sorts of things.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, I don't have any objection to anyone appearing on the ABC pretty well. I mean, I don't object to that. But it's when their views are not challenged. Now, if you want to have an interesting discussion, you get in, and there are plenty of people in Australia. You don't need to go to Yale University to pick one up. You get someone in who knows something about European history in the first half of the 20th century, which Nick Bryan should. And then you have a discussion as to whether what Trump is doing in the United States is in any way comparable to what Hitler did in Germany in 1933. In my view, the answer is no. I would be happy to argue that with Professor Stanley, but no one argued it with him. It was like he was laying down the truth. And he wasn't laying down the truth, he was laying down a historical myth, and it ought to be challenged. And if you had viewpoint diversity in the studio, you'd have an argument. But that's gone by and large now. And despite his promises early on, as you mentioned, Nick Bryan's pretty well gone back to getting a whole range of left-wing commentators on, like it was before he took over earlier this year.
Now let's listen to this interview from ABC Radio National Breakfast. Here is Sally Sara. She's discussing the bombing of Iranian state media studios with CNN's Christina Amanpour.
It's been a deadly 12 months for journalists. Scores of journalists have been killed in Gaza. And we also saw that Iranian state television came under attack. How do you reflect on this time for your profession, and how do you see that attack in Iran?
Well, that's correct. Generally, these are civilian targets, whether it's state or not. Many, authoritarian regimes have increasingly tried to kill the messenger.
Gerard, a quick answer from you, because I still got one topic I want to get to, but it seems like they've left out some crucial context here.
Well, Israel's got the freest media in the Middle East, one of the freest medias in the world. And secondly, the target that was bombed, the Iranian radio television station, is simply an arm of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. It's an agent of the Iranian theocracy. It's not something that Israel's hitting because it doesn't want to hear the opinions. We know the opinions that comes out of there. So again, it's just a distortion. It ought to be corrected. She's entitled to be interviewed on Australian television. She's an interesting presenter, but she ought to be contested.
Yeah, fair enough. And just finally, I'm sure we all remember Norman Swan. He was once hailed as Australia's most trusted doctor. He's now been reduced to this.
So, Priya, long time since I've practiced. There was no such thing as telehealth in those ancient days.
Back in the day. Were there telephones? I'm just joking.
Gerard, quite the downgrade.
Well, on his various books, he was presented as, and at the ABC, as Australia's most trusted doctor. But when I started criticising that of my media watchdog, it came down to one of Australia's most practiced doctors, most trusted doctors. But in fact, he hasn't practiced for about 4 decades. Now, he's knowledgeable about medicine, but he's not a practicing doctor. And he finally said it on ABC Radio last Saturday. So I noticed it and I thought, he hasn't practiced for a long time. He hasn't practiced for a long time. So he's not a practicing doctor. And finally we found out from the man himself, the ABC's doctor
Gerard
in the
Henderson.
house.
Gerard Henderson, thank you so much for joining us tonight.